There is a truth few are willing to accept, and even fewer are prepared to live with. The greater the calling placed upon your life, the fiercer the resistance you will face. This is not coincidence. It is not bad luck. It is not random suffering. It is the natural law of spiritual weight. Purpose attracts pressure, destiny provokes opposition, and meaning invites conflict. Many people spend their lives wondering why everything seems harder for them than for others, why the path feels heavier, why peace feels delayed, why growth demands pain, why every time they rise, something tries to pull them back down. They look around and see others advancing easily, smiling freely, sleeping peacefully, while their own nights are filled with inner battles, unanswered questions, and a silent tension they cannot explain. What most never realize is this: resistance is not punishment. It is confirmation. History has always followed this pattern. Every individual who carried a message, a mission, or a transformative calling walked through fire before touching fulfillment. Moses was hunted before he led. David was persecuted before he ruled. Joseph was imprisoned before he governed. Even Christ himself was tested in the wilderness before beginning his work. The greater the assignment, the greater the opposition. Yet in modern times, we are taught the opposite. We are told that if something is difficult, it must be wrong, that resistance means misalignment, that discomfort is a sign to turn back. But this belief is one of the greatest illusions ever sold to the human spirit, because the truth is far more sobering and far more empowering. If you are under pressure, it is often because you are carrying something valuable. The war you feel is not external first. It begins within. It manifests as doubt, exhaustion, fear, distraction, temptation, and self-sabotage. The battlefield is your mind. The objective is not your destruction, it is your delay. Because if you never step into what you were called to be, the battle is already won without a fight. This is why the calling always comes with conflict. This is why those chosen for depth are rarely given ease. This is why the strongest storms target the tallest structures. And this is why, if your life feels unusually intense, you may not be broken. You may be summoned. In this message, we will explore the hidden law that governs spiritual resistance. Why some people face battles others never will. Why the pressure increases as you grow closer to purpose. And how to recognize the signs that your struggle is not punishment, but preparation. Because once you understand this truth, everything changes. The law of resistance, why pressure increases as purpose awakens. There is a universal principle that governs both the physical and spiritual realms. Resistance always rises in proportion to potential. This law can be observed in nature, in physics, in psychology, and in the unseen dimensions of human existence. The stronger the force attempting to move forward, the greater the opposing force that rises to meet it. This is not cruelty, it is structure. A river flows effortlessly when its banks are wide and shallow. But when the terrain narrows, the water gains force, speed, and power. The pressure increases, not to stop the flow, but to shape it. In the same way, when a human being begins to awaken to a deeper purpose, life begins to narrow the path. Comfort decreases. Distractions lose their appeal, old relationships fall away, inner conflict intensifies, the soul begins to feel squeezed. This is not because something has gone wrong, it is because something is finally aligning. Most people never experience this phase because they never step far enough into their calling to trigger it. They remain in safety, routine, emotional comfort, and social conformity. But the moment a person begins to move beyond surface-level existence, resistance appears almost immediately. The first sign is inner friction. You begin to feel restless in places that once felt fine. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. Goals that once motivated you suddenly feel small. You sense that there is more, but you cannot yet define it. This internal tension is not confusion, it is awakening. And awakening always provokes opposition. The mind begins to question, fear begins to speak louder. Old habits fight to remain. The ego resists transformation because transformation requires death. Not physical death, but the death of identities, patterns, and attachments that no longer serve your evolution. This is where many people turn back. They mistake resistance for failure. They interpret discomfort as a warning. They assume the path is wrong because it is not easy. But in truth, ease is rarely a sign of growth. Ease is often a sign of stagnation. The path that leads to comfort rarely leads to purpose. The path that leads to purpose almost always leads through discomfort. This is why the battle intensifies when your calling begins to awaken. Not because you are being punished, but because you are becoming dangerous. Dangerous to limitation, to stagnation, to everything that thrives on keeping you small. Your resistance grows because your capacity grows. Your challenges multiply because your influence is expanding. Your inner war intensifies because you are nearing a threshold. And thresholds are always guarded. Every meaningful transformation in human history has followed this pattern. Before the breakthrough comes pressure. Before clarity comes confusion. Before strength comes strain. The friction is not a sign to retreat. It is proof that something is being forged within you. But here is the crucial truth most never realize. The war is not meant to defeat you. It is meant to refine you. The resistance is not there to destroy you. It is there to reveal what must be strengthened. That is why people with great callings often experience deep seasons of isolation, intense emotional pressure, repeated setbacks, unexplainable delays, heightened self-doubt, a sense of being misunderstood, a feeling of being out of place. These are not curses. They are conditions of refinement. Steel is not formed in comfort. It is forged under extreme heat and pressure. The same is true of human potential. The greater the role you are meant to play, the greater the inner strength you must develop to carry it. And strength is never built in calm waters. This is why the battle feels personal. Because it is. It is not just about circumstances. It is about identity. It is about who you are becoming versus who you used to be. The old self resists the new self. The familiar resists the unknown. The comfortable resists the calling, and until the transformation is complete, the war continues. But here is the turning point few people understand. When you stop fighting the process and start understanding it, the war changes. You stop seeing obstacles as enemies. You stop seeing pain as punishment. You stop seeing delays as denial. You begin to see them as training, preparation, alignment. The pressure no longer breaks you, it builds you. And once this shift happens, something remarkable occurs. The same forces that once tried to crush you begin to strengthen you. The same struggles that once exhausted you begin to clarify you. The same resistance that once scared you begins to confirm that you are exactly where you are meant to be. Because the truth is simple, even if it is uncomfortable. If your life feels unusually intense, it is likely because your calling is unusually great. And the greater the calling, the fiercer the war. Not to stop you, but to prepare you for what you are about to carry. If this message resonates with you, and you want to continue exploring these truths that most people never hear, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will help you understand not only why the battle exists, but how to walk through it with clarity, strength, and unshakable purpose. When the battle becomes personal, why the strongest resistance targets your mind. There comes a moment in every meaningful journey when the struggle stops feeling external and begins to feel deeply personal. At first, the challenges appear circumstantial, obstacles at work, misunderstandings with people, delays in progress, unexpected losses. But as the calling grows stronger, the battlefield shifts inward. Thoughts become heavier, Emotions grow more intense. Doubt begins to whisper with unsettling familiarity. The conflict no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening inside you. This is not accidental. The mind is the primary battlefield of all transformation. Before anything can be built in the outer world, it must be confronted in the inner one. And the higher the calling, the more the mind becomes the target. This is because the mind holds the keys to perception, belief, and action. If the mind can be weakened, confused, or exhausted, the body will follow. Motivation fades, discipline collapses, direction disappears, and the individual slowly disconnects from their purpose without ever realizing how it happened. This is why the fiercest battles are rarely visible. People see the external symptoms, fatigue, isolation, withdrawal, hesitation, but they do not see the internal war that causes them. They do not see the constant mental tug-of-war between courage and fear, faith and doubt, clarity and confusion. They do not hear the internal voice questioning whether the struggle is worth it, whether the effort matters, whether the calling is real at all. And this is exactly where the real battle is fought, because the enemy of purpose does not need to destroy you physically. It only needs to convince you to abandon yourself. This is why the pressure intensifies precisely when you are getting closer to growth. The mind begins to replay old failures. It magnifies uncertainty. It brings back memories you thought you had healed from. It whispers comparisons. It reminds you of everything that could go wrong. It tells you that you are behind, that others are ahead, that your effort is pointless. These thoughts feel personal because they are designed to feel personal. They are tailored to your fears, your history, your wounds. And yet, paradoxically, their appearance is often the clearest sign that you are progressing. Because stagnation does not provoke resistance, transformation does. When nothing is changing, there is nothing to oppose. But when you begin to outgrow old limits, something inside you reacts. The part of you that seeks comfort resists growth. The part of you that fears uncertainty tries to regain control. The part of you that is attached to familiarity attempts to pull you back. This is why so many people sabotage themselves just before breakthrough. They procrastinate, they overthink, they numb themselves with distractions. They suddenly doubt paths they once felt certain about. They retreat into old habits that no longer serve them. Not because they are weak, but because the mind is trying to protect itself from the unknown. Growth requires the death of previous versions of self, and the mind, by nature, resists death of any kind, even symbolic death. This is why clarity often comes with discomfort. This is why awakening often feels like chaos before it feels like peace. This is why people on the verge of purpose often feel more confused than those who have never questioned anything. And this is also why the battle becomes more psychological than external, because once you understand your environment, the next frontier is understanding yourself. And the moment you begin to see through your own patterns, the resistance intensifies. You may begin to feel unusually tired without physical cause. You may feel emotionally heavy without knowing why. You may feel disconnected from things you once enjoyed. You may question your worth, your direction, even your faith. This is not regression. It is reorganization. The mind is restructuring itself to handle a greater level of awareness, but restructuring is uncomfortable. Think of it like renovating a house while still living inside it. Everything feels chaotic. Nothing feels settled. Noise, dust, and disruption become daily experiences, yet all of it serves a purpose, to create a stronger foundation. The same is happening internally. Old belief systems are being challenged. Old emotional patterns are being dismantled, old identities are being questioned, and the ego resists this process fiercely because the ego's primary goal is safety, not growth. Safety says, stay where you are. Growth says, go where you've never been. And these two forces cannot coexist peacefully. This is why the mental battle often intensifies right before clarity arrives. The mind senses change approaching and reacts defensively. It throws distractions in your path. It amplifies fear. It tries to convince you that retreat is wisdom. But there is a profound difference between intuition and fear. Intuition is calm, even when firm. Fear is loud, urgent, and repetitive. Fear demands immediate action. Intuition invites patience. Fear tells you to run. Intuition tells you to endure. When the calling is real, fear will often disguise itself as logic. It will present reasonable arguments. It will use past experiences as evidence. It will tell you that you are being realistic, cautious, smart, but underneath it all, the fear is not protecting you from danger. It is protecting you from transformation. This is why those with greater callings experience deeper mental battles. They are being asked to step beyond old identities, beyond inherited beliefs, beyond limitations that once defined them. And that process is not gentle. It strips illusions, it exposes weaknesses, it demands honesty, it forces growth, but it also builds something extraordinary. Because on the other side of mental resistance lies clarity. On the other side of fear lies strength. On the other side of confusion lies purpose. Those who endure this phase begin to notice something subtle but powerful. The noise quiets. The fear loses intensity. The inner chaos starts to organize itself. The mind becomes steadier. Decisions become clearer. Confidence grows, not from arrogance, but from understanding. They realize that the war was never meant to destroy them. It was meant to discipline them, to sharpen their awareness, to strengthen their resolve, to separate emotional impulse from true intention. And once this realization settles in, the battle changes. The mind no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes an instrument, a tool rather than a tyrant, a guide rather than an obstacle. And this is when the individual begins to step fully into their calling, not because the resistance disappears, but because it no longer controls them. They learn to move forward even when fear is present. They learn to act without perfect certainty. They learn to trust the process even when the outcome is unclear. This is the mark of someone who has crossed a threshold. They are no longer running from the war. They understand why it exists, and they are no longer afraid of it, because they now see the truth. The greater the calling, the more intense the mental battle, not to weaken you, but to prepare your mind to carry what is coming next. And only those who endure this internal war with awareness, patience and discipline ever reach the other side. If this message speaks to something inside you, and you want to continue this journey of understanding purpose, resistance, and inner strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will take you even deeper into why this battle exists and how to walk through it with clarity instead of fear. The deeper a person moves into their calling, the more they begin to notice a strange pattern. The battles no longer come from outside alone. They come from within, through people, through circumstances, through moments that feel almost designed to test emotional limits. This is not coincidence, it is alignment. When purpose grows, everything that cannot grow with it begins to surface. At this stage, the war changes its face. It no longer looks like obvious resistance. It becomes subtle. It hides in relationships, in timing, in missed opportunities, in misunderstandings, in emotional triggers that seem to come from nowhere. What once felt like random chaos begins to reveal an underlying pattern, a pattern of refinement. This is the phase where many people misinterpret what is happening to them. They believe life is turning against them. They feel isolated. They feel misunderstood. They begin to wonder why things seem to fall apart just as they were gaining clarity. But the truth is far deeper than frustration or misfortune. When a calling grows, it demands space, and space is created through separation. Not everyone can walk with you into the next version of your life. Not every environment can sustain your expansion. Not every habit can coexist with your growth. And so, life begins to remove what no longer aligns, sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully. This is where the pain intensifies, because separation hurts more than struggle. Struggle feels purposeful. Separation feels personal. It can feel like betrayal, like abandonment, like loss. People drift away, dynamics change, support systems collapse, the familiar disappears, and in that silence, doubt often creeps in. You may ask yourself if you made a mistake, if you pushed too hard, if you misunderstood your path, if you should go back to what was comfortable. But the uncomfortable truth is this: comfort is often incompatible with calling. Growth demands space, and space often feels like emptiness before it feels like freedom. This is why the journey feels lonely at times. Not because you are meant to be alone forever, but because certain transformations can only occur in solitude. Noise drowns intuition. Distraction weakens clarity. Constant validation prevents inner authority from developing. There are lessons that can only be learned when no one else is there to lean on. This is where the strength of character is forged. This is where the voice inside becomes louder than the voices outside. This is where dependence slowly transforms into self-trust. And this is where many give up, not because they cannot continue, but because they misinterpret the silence as failure. They think that because support has faded, the path must be wrong. They think that because things feel harder, they must have taken a wrong turn. But in reality, the opposite is often true. The silence is not abandonment, it is initiation. Every calling has a threshold that cannot be crossed with external validation. At some point, belief must come from within. Faith must replace certainty. Inner conviction must replace approval. This is why the war intensifies at this stage. Because once you pass this point, you no longer need permission. You no longer need reassurance. You no longer need to be pushed. You move because you know. And that level of autonomy is dangerous to anything that thrives on control, fear, or dependency. This is why the emotional pressure becomes heavier, why doubt tries to sound logical, why exhaustion sets in even without physical strain, why the mind replays old narratives in an attempt to pull you back. It is the final resistance of the old self. The version of you that learned to survive instead of evolve, the version that learned to adapt instead of expand, the version that equated safety with stagnation. But that version cannot go where you are going, and that is why it must dissolve. This dissolution can feel like loss of identity. You may feel like you no longer recognize yourself. Your desires change, your priorities shift. What once excited you now feels empty. What once scared you now feels necessary. This is not confusion, it is recalibration. Your inner compass is being reset, and recalibration feels disorienting before it feels empowering. This is why patience becomes crucial at this stage. Not passive patience, but grounded endurance, the ability to stay present even when clarity hasn't arrived yet. The ability to keep walking without immediate answers. The ability to trust that the discomfort is shaping you, not breaking you. Because what lies beyond this phase is not chaos. It is coherence. Once the old structures collapse, new ones form naturally. Your thinking becomes sharper, your boundaries become stronger, your energy becomes more focused. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself. You stop needing to prove your worth. You begin to move with quiet confidence. And when that happens, the war changes again. The noise fades. The fear loses its grip. The struggle becomes purposeful rather than overwhelming. You begin to realize that the battle was never meant to be won through force, but through understanding. That endurance was more important than speed. That alignment mattered more than approval, that the calling was never about recognition, but about transformation. And when you reach this understanding, something profound happens. The war no longer controls you. You control how you move through it. You no longer panic when things fall apart. You no longer fear uncertainty. You no longer interpret difficulty as failure. You see everything as training, as preparation, as refinement. You understand that strength is not built in moments of comfort, but in moments where giving up would be easier. And this realization changes everything. Because now, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this preparing me for?" That single shift in perception transforms suffering into meaning, and meaning gives pain a purpose. This is when you step fully into your calling, not because life becomes easy, but because you become unshakable. You no longer run from the fire. You walk through it with awareness, because you understand something most people never do. The greater the calling, the deeper the refinement. The deeper the refinement, the stronger the foundation. And the stronger the foundation, the greater the impact you are meant to have. If this message resonates with you, if you feel this battle within yourself, and if you sense that this journey is shaping you for something greater, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will go even deeper into the purpose behind the struggle, and how to step fully into the strength that is being built within you. As the journey continues, something subtle yet profound begins to happen. The noise that once dominated your inner world starts to lose its grip. The chaos that once felt overwhelming begins to organize itself. Not because the struggle has ended, but because you are changing the way you relate to it. This is one of the most important transitions a person with a high calling will ever experience. The shift from resistance to responsibility. At this stage, you no longer ask why the battle exists. You begin to understand that it must exist. You see clearly now that the struggle was never meant to break you, expose you, or humiliate you. It was meant to train you to hold weight, emotional weight, spiritual weight, psychological weight, without collapsing under it. This is the stage where strength becomes quiet. Before, strength looked like endurance, like pushing through pain, like surviving one difficult moment after another. But now, strength begins to take a different form. It becomes restraint, discernment, stillness, the ability to remain centered even when everything around you is uncertain. You begin to notice that you no longer react the way you used to. Things that once triggered anger now provoke reflection. Situations that once caused panic now bring clarity. People who once drained you no longer have access to your energy, not because you hardened your heart, but because you learned where your energy belongs. This is the fruit of the battle. This is what the pressure was shaping. The calling does not require chaos. It requires stability, and stability can only be built after the storm has revealed your weak points. At this stage, many people experience a strange calm mixed with a deep seriousness. Life feels heavier, but also clearer. There is less noise, but more meaning. Fewer distractions, but deeper thoughts. The mind becomes more selective. The heart becomes more guarded, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing validation. You stop proving your worth. You stop seeking approval, because you have seen what distraction costs. You have felt what misalignment does to the soul. And you no longer want to live that way. This is where discipline is born, not as punishment, but as devotion. Discipline becomes the language of self-respect. You begin to choose silence over noise, depth over speed, truth over comfort. You start saying no to things that once excited you because you now recognize their hidden cost. You start walking away from conversations that pull you backward. You start guarding your time, your thoughts, your emotional energy. Not because you are cold, but because you finally understand their value. This is one of the clearest signs that the calling is active, because when a person begins to respect their inner world, their outer world changes. But this phase also brings a different kind of challenge, a quieter one. Loneliness, not the lonely feeling of being unwanted, but the loneliness of walking a path few understand. The loneliness of realizing that most people are not interested in depth, growth, or transformation. They want comfort, they want distraction, they want familiarity. And when you no longer resonate with those things, the distance becomes noticeable. This is where many people feel a deep sense of separation, not from others, but from who they used to be. And that separation can feel like grief. You grieve old versions of yourself. You grieve old dreams that no longer fit. You grieve relationships that can't follow you forward. But this grief is not loss. It is shedding. It is the natural consequence of growth. You cannot evolve without leaving something behind. And the more significant the calling, the more significant the shedding. This is where wisdom begins to replace ambition. You stop chasing outcomes. You start honoring process. You stop asking when things will happen. You start focusing on who you are becoming. And in that shift, something powerful emerges. Inner authority. You no longer need external validation to feel grounded. You no longer need constant reassurance. You begin to trust your own perception. Your intuition sharpens. Your decisions become more deliberate. Your emotions stabilize. You feel less urgency and more certainty. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. You are no longer trying to force life to make sense. You are allowing it to unfold while remaining anchored within yourself. This is why the battle had to be intense. This level of calm cannot be learned intellectually. It must be earned through experience, through pressure, through confusion, through moments where quitting felt easier than continuing, because only then do you learn the difference between impulse and intuition, between fear and awareness, between noise and truth. And when that understanding settles in, something remarkable happens. You begin to see the world differently. You notice patterns others miss. You sense motives behind words. You recognize cycles before they repeat. You feel when something is aligned and when it is not. This awareness is not mystical. It is the natural result of having faced yourself deeply. Most people never reach this stage because they turn back at the discomfort. They retreat when the identity starts dissolving. They choose familiarity over evolution. But you did not. You stayed. You endured. You questioned. You reflected. And because of that, your perception has expanded. You are no longer ruled by impulse. You are guided by understanding. This is the quiet power that emerges after the storm, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply grounded. And from this place, your actions carry weight, your words carry clarity, your presence carries stability. You don't need to announce who you are becoming. It shows. This is when the calling stops feeling like a burden and begins to feel like alignment. Not because life becomes easy, but because you become capable of holding responsibility, capable of navigating uncertainty, capable of standing firm without force. And this is where the final transformation begins. Because once you have mastered yourself, the outer battles lose their grip. The chaos no longer controls you. The fear no longer defines you. The pressure no longer overwhelms you. You have become steady, and a steady soul cannot be shaken easily. This is the quiet strength that the calling was always meant to awaken. If this message resonates with you, if you feel this process unfolding within you, and if you sense that you are being shaped for something greater, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will reveal the final stage of this journey, where purpose becomes action and inner strength transforms into lasting impact. At this stage of the journey, something fundamental has shifted. The noise that once dominated your thoughts has quieted. The urgency that once pushed you to react has softened. You no longer feel the need to fight every battle, prove every point, or defend every emotion. Not because you have become indifferent, but because you have become grounded. This is the moment when the calling stops feeling like a burden and starts to feel like responsibility. There is a profound difference between the two. A burden is something you carry unwillingly. A responsibility is something you carry with awareness. And awareness changes everything. You now understand that the war was never meant to be dramatic. It was meant to be transformative. The struggle was not designed to glorify suffering, but to refine perception. The pressure was not placed upon you to crush you, but to teach you how to stand when things are heavy. This is the stage where many people finally realize something essential. The calling was never about becoming more powerful than others. It was about becoming stable within yourself. True strength does not shout. It does not rush. It does not seek validation. It simply stands. And this is where the final phase begins. Because once you reach this level of inner stability, the external world begins to respond differently to you. Not because it has changed, but because you have. You no longer chase opportunities, you recognize them. You no longer fear loss, you understand impermanence. You no longer cling to outcomes, you focus on alignment. You no longer feel threatened by silence, you understand its wisdom. This is the quiet authority that emerges after deep internal work, and it is rare. Most people never reach this stage because it requires something very few are willing to give. Surrender of control, not surrender in weakness, but surrender in trust. Trust that life is not random. Trust that timing has intelligence. Trust that what is meant for you cannot be missed when you are aligned. This trust changes the way you move through the world. You stop forcing connections. You stop chasing recognition. You stop trying to prove your worth. You act with calm certainty. You speak with intention. You choose with clarity. And this is where the calling fully activates. Because a calling does not require chaos to function. It requires presence. It requires clarity. It requires someone who can hold responsibility without being consumed by it. This is why the war had to happen. Without it, you would have lacked the depth to carry what is meant for you. Without it, you would have been driven by ego instead of purpose. Without it, you would have confused noise for meaning. The battle stripped you of illusions. It forced you to confront yourself. It taught you restraint. It taught you patience. It taught you humility. And now, standing on the other side of it, you are different. You think differently. You feel differently. You move differently. And people will notice. Not because you announce it, but because your presence carries weight. You will notice that conversations change around you, that some people feel uncomfortable in your presence without knowing why, that others feel drawn to you, even if they cannot explain it. This is not mysticism. It is coherence. When your inner world becomes aligned, it sends a signal outward, and the world responds. This is when your influence begins. Quietly, steadily, authentically. Not through force, not through noise, but through consistency. You become someone others feel safe around, someone who listens deeply, someone whose words carry intention, someone whose silence speaks louder than arguments. This is the highest form of strength, and it only comes after the war. After the confusion, after the doubt, after the shedding, after the loneliness, after the internal storms. This is why so few reach this point, because it requires walking through uncertainty without guarantee. It requires trusting growth without applause. It requires believing in a purpose before it becomes visible. And yet, those who do reach this stage often look back and realize something extraordinary. They would not change a single step of the journey, not the pain, not the loss, not the struggle, because every moment shaped the clarity they now carry. Every setback refined their discernment. Every challenge strengthened their character. Every tear watered the roots of their strength. And now, standing here, they understand the truth that once felt impossible to grasp. The war was never against them. It was for them, to prepare them, to strengthen them, to align them, to ensure that when the calling finally arrived in full, they would be ready to carry it without breaking. This is the quiet triumph few ever speak about. Not success, not recognition, but inner mastery. And once you reach this point, you realize something that changes everything. You no longer fear what's ahead, because you trust who you have become. You no longer ask if you are strong enough. You know you are. You no longer question the purpose of the struggle. You understand it. And that understanding gives you peace. A deep-grounded peace that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that remains even when things are uncertain, a peace born not from ease but from endurance. This is the final gift of the journey, and this is why the calling was worth the war. If you felt this message resonate within you, if you recognize this journey in your own life, and if you want to continue exploring these deeper truths about purpose, growth, and inner strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel. What comes next will help you deepen this understanding even further and walk forward with clarity, confidence, and unwavering purpose.